Hello there and good evening. I'm Don Arleth and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. U.S.-Ukraine negotiations are set to start again, this time in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine is bringing a plan and first concession as Kyiv proposes a ceasefire in the sky and at sea. Also, the minerals deal between the U.S. and Ukraine will be discussed and possibly even signed. But will this be enough for the Trump administration to be convinced that Ukraine is acting in good faith to end the war? We'll have more on that in just a bit, but first, the latest headlines. Election interference or Democratic backsliding? Romanian court bars presidential candidate from running in May elections. Greenland's independence in the spotlight on the eve of elections. And Canada has a new prime minister. Can he take on Donald Trump's trade war and win?
Put into action our plan to build a stronger economy.
After the shouting match heard around the world in the Oval Office between U.S. President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, it's time to re-engage to find a path to peace talks, this time in Saudi Arabia. U.S. and Ukrainian delegations will sit down for negotiations in Jeddah on Tuesday, but whether there will be some kind of breakthrough remains an open question. Our chief political correspondent, Salman, brings us the latest in this next report.
It started with a spat.
You're not in a good position.
Now a sit-down in Saudi Arabia. But this time there will be no Trump-Zelenskyy rematch, with officials from the two countries deployed to sound each other out. They include U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Volodymyr Zelenskyy's Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak. Despite not being on the ground, President Trump is making his expectations clear.
I think we're going to have a good time. I think we're going to have a good result in Saudi Arabia, meaning they're hosting the various talks. And we have a lot of good people going out there. And I think Ukraine's going to do well, and I think Russia's going to do well. I think some very big things could happen this week. I hope so.
Reports suggest Kyiv will propose an air and sea ceasefire with Russia, while the US wants to determine if Ukraine is willing to make any material concessions to end the war.
If you want a truce, we are ready, but not a truce on the land where Putin will take a break for a few months to heal his wounded, recruit more impoverished people from within the Russian Empire, gather tens of thousands of slaves to storm fortifications, bring in more infantry from North Korea or another satellite country, and then resume the war. We are not ready for such a truce.
One expert says the stakes are higher than ever.
It's critical for Europe as well, because if Ukraine caves, if they capitulate and give in to these negotiations and basically walk out with a deal that's just favorable to Putin, it's going to come back to haunt Europe, especially Poland, especially the Baltic states early on.
The deal to exchange rare earth mineral reserves for American security guarantees is also likely to be back on the table after being derailed following the war of words in the Oval Office. So why is this all now happening in the Middle East?
Saudi views itself as a middling to great power, and obviously a great power in energy and financial terms. And its motivations are indeed principally commercial.
In fact, just before Tuesday's talks, President Zelenskyy touched down in Saudi Arabia to meet with Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman. It comes as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer reveals plans to host a virtual follow-up meeting with world leaders after his Coalition of the Willing summit in London just over a week ago. The wheels of diplomacy turning and taking another pit stop in Jeddah. Salman, TVP World.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski spoke with U.S. Special Envoy General Kellogg about the peace negotiations between Washington and Kyiv in Saudi Arabia. Both sides stressed the need to conclude a fair peace. After the conversation, Minister Sikorski contacted the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha. After the United States suspended weapons deliveries and intelligence sharing for Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has taken advantage of the situation and ramped up attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilians. And now let's go to Kyiv to our correspondent Oz Chatterjee for the latest updates. Good evening, Oz. So how have these decisions by the United States impacted the situation there in Ukraine?
Well, while the Ukrainians are mulling, proposing a pause to the air and sea war, the land war here is still very much taking place day in, day out, grinding attrition across the front lines. The biggest place that has been impacted by recent fighting is in Russia, in the Kursk Oblast, the Ukrainian salient. They pushed into Russia in August 2024. Now, the Russians have been pushing really hard in the last few weeks to try and regain ground in the Kursk region. And the Ukrainians, for their part, have admitted that they have been forced into tactical retreats. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, General Alexander Syrsky, posted a statement on his Facebook on Monday discussing these events, discussing that retreat. And there have been reports from Ukrainian military analysts that the Russians were close to encircling Ukrainian troops in the Kursk Oblast. Now, General Syrsky has said that they are reinforcing positions in the Kursk Oblast. They've sent more Ukrainian troops there, but dismissed the notion that they would be encircled, saying there is currently no threat of encirclement of our units in Kursk Oblast. The units are taking timely measures to maneuver to favorable defense lines. So it's clear the Ukrainians are in a state of retreat in parts of the Kursk Oblast. And there are many analysts here who are saying that because of the lack of intelligence sharing, that this is starting to have an impact in parts of the front line. The Ukrainians, for their part, are going to hope that these talks in Jeddah can try and restore at least that intelligence gathering that they use so important to defending their skies, but also monitoring and tracking frontline activity on a day-to-day basis.
All right, Oz Chatterjee reporting for us there from Kyiv. Thank you very much for that. And of course, we're crossing our fingers for Saudi Arabia. And now let's go to Romania, where the aftermath of the canceled democratic presidential election has echoed far beyond the country's national borders. In Bucharest, protests broke out on Sunday in support of pro-Russian presidential candidate Calin Georgescu, who won the first round of presidential elections last year and has been barred from entering the May ballot due to a Constitutional Electoral Bureau decision. Georgescu on social media has called the ban a direct blow to the heart of democracy worldwide.
Romania's presidential hopeful, Calin Georgescu, has been barred from re-entering the presidential election rerun scheduled for May. The Central Electoral Bureau announced the decision on Sunday on the grounds that his candidacy, quote, doesn't meet the conditions of legality as he violated the very obligation to defend democracy.
Evidence was gathered against Georgescu given his underground deals with basically paramilitary organizations.
The far-right populist candidate non grata was quick to spin the accusation around.
A direct blow to the heart of democracy worldwide. I have one message left. If democracy in Romania falls, the entire democratic world will fall. This is just the beginning. It's that simple. Europe is now a dictatorship. Romania is under tyranny.
The references to anti-democracy were parroted by conservatives elsewhere, including outspoken supporter of the European far-right and U.S. President Trump's close advisor, Elon Musk. But while some experts suggest that Georgescu and his supporters might be all bark and no bite,
Georgescu is an adventurer surrounded by adventurers. These people are really not serious. They are organized crime, networks and networks of organized crime with connections with Romania's former Securitate, who found this guy. This guy had been running in elections for 20 years, in all kinds of elections. So he's like a professional presidential candidate.
The impact that Georgescu himself and the extreme right expected to see, a sort of revolution of frustration. Neither the nation nor God were there to basically create the waves, ripples that he was expecting yesterday.
Others warned that the decision to ban a candidate in presidential elections could deepen the constitutional crisis rapidly brewing in the country.
Cancel his election. It's never a good thing for a democracy. So much so that it's been so many months ever since. So the political crisis, the polarization only grew because there's this, nobody really knows where we're heading.
The crisis for which Georgescu has become the poster boy since the now annulled November presidential elections, which ended in his shock victory despite Georgescu consistently polling below 10%. The outcome of the election was ruled to be the result of Georgescu's campaign misconduct. This ranged from the use of TikTok to gain unfair exposure to
problems with funding, problems with foreign intervention, and he lying entirely about his sources of income. Not even his fiscal status is clear.
Georgescu vowed to appeal the Central Electoral Bureau's decision, which he has 24 hours to do. The Constitutional Court will then have 72 hours to respond.
And now, down in the Balkans, fears of a power vacuum developing in Bosnia and Herzegovina have caused NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte to visit the country and urge calm. The tensions stem from the Serb region's pro-Russian president, Milorad Dodik, who was last month sentenced to 1 year in jail and banned from participating in politics for 6 years. Dodik advocates for the Serb region of the country to break away and join Serbia. Rutte urged Bosnia's tri-party presidency to take responsibility and prevent the situation from escalating. Aisa Abachi has more.
Amid escalating tensions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte visited Sarajevo on Monday to reaffirm key NATO and EU commitments to the region.
We will not allow hard-won peace to be jeopardized. NATO will continue to support you on your European and on your Euro-Atlantic path, on which you are advancing.
His visit comes in the midst of a political crisis that has seen the country's international peace envoy locked in a feud with Milorad Dodik, the pro-Russian president of Republika Srpska, the majority Serb enclave in the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
It will be up to the political leaders of Bosnia and Herzegovina to take their responsibility here.
Russia always supported Dodik because Mr. Dodik's policy represented kind of, he was always a troublemaker in Bosnia, let's be honest. And according to Bosnian politicians, it was Dodik who created the most serious political, legal problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
On Friday, Bosnia's constitutional court suspended separatist laws signed by Milorad Dodik, calling them an attack on the constitution. Last month, Dodik was sentenced to a year in jail and banned from politics for 6 years, but he rejected the verdict, and the Serb parliament blocked national police and courts from its grounds.
Today, you no longer have the Bosnia and Herzegovina that you imagined. I need the support of the people, and I will go until the end.
In light of recent escalations, the European Union's peacekeeping mission EUR4 has announced a temporary boost of its 1,100-strong force in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
This is not 1992, and we will not allow a security vacuum to emerge. The international community is here and committed to continuing our strong support, including through EUR4 and NATO.
Additionally, Washington showed support for the Dayton Accords, saying it firmly opposed any actions by local leaders that would undermine Bosnia's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
It is kind of disappointment for Mr. Dodik to hear that strong support for Bosnia's territorial integrity and, of course, sovereignty, and the Dayton Agreement from the State Secretary.
The Dayton Peace Agreement ended the Bosnian War of 1992-1995, which killed 100,000 people.
U.S. President Donald Trump really wants to get his hands on Greenland, saying that the United States will take it one way or the other. Currently, the Arctic territory is self-governed but still belongs to Denmark. But that could change as Greenlanders head to the polls on Tuesday. 5 of the 6 parties on the ballot favor Greenland's independence from Denmark, but vary on how quickly that independence should come about. And the U.S. interest has put Greenland's international standing in the spotlight. Now let's go to Sonia Gadabishchan, who's on the ground with this report.
31 parliamentary representatives are to be elected this Tuesday in Greenland. The current composition consists of 5 political parties, the majority of which come from the IA left-wing Community of the People Party. We spoke to one of the representatives who said that if IA won, they would prioritize having their own government and pursuing independence.
I think we want to, for my party, we want to make sure to have safe alliances, especially with Europe, because Europe is our alliance as well, before Trump decided to affect that. So I think it's really important to stand together against, I don't know what to call it, but the threats that have been coming from Trump.
This election is taking place among repeated insinuations from President Donald Trump about wanting to acquire Greenland, a self-governing territory of Denmark. Although all 5 political parties in the parliament are interested in independence, they differ in their opinions on how and when to achieve it. One of the politicians that welcome the interest of the United States is Kuno Fenker, a representative of Nalirak, a centrist party, the only party that is in favor of potentially severing ties with Denmark right away.
He said that he respects our right to self-determination, and it's our choice to either join the United States if Denmark opposes it, or if Denmark opposes our right, if they don't want to cooperate with us. We will, of course, have to talk to other states.
When I asked Fenker if prioritizing self-determination and welcoming this interest from the United States are not somewhat opposing interests, this is what he said.
Every negotiation has opposing parts. Our right to external self-determination is non-negotiable from Greenland's side. We will not be annexed by another country again.
Alongside aspirations for sooner or later independence, there appears to be a general pull towards international collaboration.
Because being independent doesn't mean that you're an island in the middle of the ocean, not being associated with other countries. That's not how it works in a global world. Of course, we're going to be associated with many countries, and hopefully, my personal opinion is that we're also going to be associated with the EU.
Under a 2009 agreement with Denmark, Greenland has full control over its domestic affairs, but still significantly relies on Denmark, which is in charge of foreign policy and defense. Denmark is providing Greenland with an annual subsidy of approximately $570 million, which constitutes about 1/3 of the island's budget. From Nuuk, for TVP World, Sonia Gadabishchan.
And the votes are in, and Canada has a new prime minister. Former central banker Mark Carney took 86% of the ballots cast to beat former finance minister Chrystia Freeland in a battle for the head of the Liberal Party. The now former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau previously announced he would be stepping down in January after his approval numbers plummeted. Canada and the new Prime Minister have a lot at stake as U.S. President Donald Trump has launched a trade war on America's closest trading partner. He has also announced his desire to make Canada the 51st state. Sasha Farbach reports.
The next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney.
To cheers and applause, Mark Carney has succeeded Justin Trudeau as Canada's new Prime Minister of the Liberal Party. The former central banker takes the baton amidst a tense standoff with a belligerent Donald Trump. But the new Prime Minister already has a message for the president's threats from Washington.
America is not Canada. And Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form.
Mark Carney is seen as a steady pair of hands whose experience will serve him well navigating global crises, including the escalating trade war with the U.S. The new Prime Minister is a former governor of the Bank of Canada and uniquely also the Bank of England. He's tackled the 2008 financial crisis successfully, and his leadership has earned him respect.
Someone that comes from the establishment. So
his appearance, his demeanor, his policies would seem to reflect his many decades of work within international institutions, within government, both in Canada and in the UK. So he has the transatlantic exposure. He obviously also has the American experience. And I think in that sense, he represents a leader who knows the players in the world on both sides of the Atlantic.
As a NATO founding member, security matters to Ottawa. Since 2022, Canada has committed around $4.5 billion in military assistance to Ukraine, including 4 M777 howitzers and 155mm ammunition, demonstrating its strong support for global security. Despite its key role in NATO, it remains one of the few member states not meeting the 2% defense spending threshold, a hurdle for the new leader.
Mark Carney will find it challenging to increase that spending very much beyond the promised 2% by 2030. If you compare that to Poland, it seems rather unimpressive.
Canada remains a key NATO player and has around 1,600 personnel in Latvia, leading one of NATO's multinational battle groups as part of Operation Reassurance. Since 2014, Canada has been contributing troops and assets to ensure regional stability and strengthen collective defense, especially amid rising tensions with Russia.
Canada's commitment to having a presence in Europe, especially in Central and Eastern Europe on the eastern flank of NATO, has been very strong, and I think that will continue no matter which government is in power in Canada.
Canada's new Prime Minister brings a wealth of crisis management experience to the table, but with no majority, the looming federal election, possibly much sooner than October, poses a real challenge. We'll need to make an impact fast before the voters have their say. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
U.S. and Ukrainian officials are gearing up for another high-level meeting to discuss peace talks, the first since the explosive confrontation in the White House on February 28th. President Zelenskyy traveled to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to meet with the Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman on Monday. And on Tuesday, the United States and Ukrainian delegations will hold talks in the Red Sea port city of Jeddah. There is a concrete first proposal by the Ukrainian side, a ceasefire in the air and at sea, but not on the ground. And now joining me to discuss these talks and what we can expect is Director of the Polish Institute for International Affairs, Jarosław Ćwiek-Karpowicz. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Yes, now President Zelenskyy today meeting with Crown Prince bin Salman. What is Zelenskyy going to try and communicate to the Crown Prince as we approach what we would expect to be a long series of peace talks?
I mean, there are many important things between Saudi Arabia and Ukraine. For example, both countries are very much interested in the, let's say, stable situation in Syria, because still there is a Russian presence in Syria, and Saudi Arabia, as a Sunni country, is very much influential on the Middle East, and its main opponent, Iran, would like still be very present in Syria. So this is one of the examples of the common interest. But also, I mean, the Ukrainian government knows that Russia is influential everywhere, so it's important to hit Russian interests around the world. And also, last but not least, crude oil prices. For Saudi Arabia, the crude oil prices are very important to stabilize its economy, but still this country has some limit of maneuver. Mm-hmm. For Russia, this is the main source of the main income, also to finance the military expenditure. So that's why Ukraine really would like to have Saudi Arabia on its board. And this visit was announced some time ago, so it was planned before. And now I think this is a good opportunity for Volodymyr Zelenskyy just to come to Saudi Arabia as a parallel to the peace talk, which would help tomorrow.
Yes, now Ukraine is proposing a ceasefire in the air and at sea, but not on the ground, as they fear that the Russians will regroup and attack again. What do you make of this proposal?
I mean, this is that's exactly what Donald Trump wanted from Ukrainians, to be very constructive. And this is a proposal which is very good. I mean, because partial ceasefire may indeed secure Ukrainian interest Ukraine economy, which is hit by Russian rockets and aerial bombs and strikes, and also access to the global markets through the Black Sea. So that's why partial ceasefire would be very beneficial for Ukraine. But also, this is what is still the Ukraine problem, that this time could be used by Russians to make some advance on the ground. So that's why the ground ceasefire is still impossible for Ukrainians without any security guarantees. So that's why this is exactly the partial ceasefire. This is a Ukrainian proposal without any conditions, right?
Right, and then we still have the minerals deal, which still kind of hangs in the balance. I imagine they will discuss it. Potentially, there might be a signing of a deal. Do you think that it's in Ukraine's interest to still move forward with this deal in light of Donald Trump saying that he's likely not to reinstate the weapons deliveries or the intelligence sharing?
I mean, indeed, the minerals deal is not so, let's say, crucial for Ukrainians as it was 2 weeks ago. I think also the situation is a little bit different. I mean, now, first of all, the Ukrainian government is completely supported by the society. So this is the effect of Trump's, very negative speech towards Zelenskyy. There's opposite effect. There is a consolidation among the Ukrainian society. Secondly, Ukrainian army is still it's holding its position. There is no progress on the ground. And this is, I think, quite astonishing. That Russians, they are not using this time to make some, serious attack on Ukraine. So it shows us that Ukrainians are quite in a good condition. And thirdly, I think that this political support of Europeans, I think it's something also unexpected. So that's why I think that before tomorrow's talks, Ukrainians are in a much better position than it seems to be like a week ago. And of course, mineral deal, it's still something how to, let's say, having once again the American assistance or support, but it's not so, critical as it was 2 weeks ago.
The United States also wants to see Ukraine make territorial concessions. We know the Ukrainian line, and it's really not changed. How do you see this panning out? Do you think that Ukraine does need to make some certain territorial concessions, or do you think this may be impossible due to the constitution, right, in Ukraine?
Yeah, as far as I understand the current situation, the territorial concession is not in this sense that Ukrainians should give more territory to Russia, but rather to accept the euro, the changing of its borders. And this is something which we are right. Probably Ukrainians would be asked as a next step. And I'm not quite sure if it will be red line and Ukrainians say, no, we don't want to accept the Russian invasion, right? But I hope that we are still far away from this point because this concessions, so-called legitimization of Russian attack would have very negative impact on the whole European architecture, security architecture, and also the international law system. So that's why I think that hopefully U.S. government would be not so, let's say, strong in...
Well, do you think that the Trump administration understands the ramifications for international law and what a precedent this would set?
It's not the most important point, for sure, for them. For us, for Europeans, especially here in Poland, it would be very difficult to convince other countries which are in Central Eastern Europe that, look, we can promise you, or we may somehow obey international law just to protect your interests. Definitely it would be a very bad signal for these countries to be, let's say, more adapt to the situation that the stronger has, let's say, better position. In this regard, the stronger are the Russians.
Right. We have just about 1 minute left. I'd like to get a quick reaction to the Twitter match going on between Foreign Minister Sikorski and Elon Musk when talking about Starlink for Ukraine. Do you think that, and based on what we saw in the Oval Office, do you think that maybe some of these more influential people don't need to be challenged in public, or do you think that this was a great move by Foreign Minister Sikorski?
I mean, for sure, I support my foreign minister in explaining Americans how its assistance to Ukraine is indeed realized by Europeans, by our means. It means that the Starlink system is financed, co-financed also by the Polish side. But the second thing, which is also very important, is also like between Zelenskyy and Trump discussion. I think there's the second example of intervention, someone who has no, let's say, power to say something. Elon Musk has no position in the U.S. government dealing with foreign policy. So why Elon Musk said something about the American assistance towards Ukrainians? So Radek Sikorski's response to Elon Musk provoked Rubio response, which is good because Mr. Rubio is a state secretary and definitely should has a much more clear position, and he was not so vocal during the Zelenskyy and Trump discussion. Now he had a chance, which is good, and Radek Sikorski's response at the very end was that thank you, Mr. State Secretary, for confirmation that U.S. and Poland is dealing together in providing internet assistance to Ukraine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Jarosław Ćwiek-Karpowicz, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thanks for joining, and see you next time. Good night.